The story of existential thought begins long before the word existentialism ever appeared. It starts with a feeling that life is not just a set of rules handed down from outside. It starts with a question about who each person really is when the noise of society fades. Two early voices speak loudly in this story: Søren Kierkegaard and Friedrich Nietzsche. Their lives and ideas plant the seeds that later thinkers will grow into a full philosophy. Kierkegaard was a Danish pastor's son who grew up in a very religious world. He loved the church, but he also felt a deep doubt about the way the church taught faith. In his early 20s, he broke with the church hierarchy. He left the official congregation and started to write under a pen name. He called that break the leap of faith. He wrote that a true believer must choose faith for himself, not because the crowd says so. He said, "Objectivity is truth." In plain words, he meant that what matters most is how a person feels inside, not what others declare as true. A story from his life shows how this idea lived in his own heart. When his father died, the church offered a formal, polite ceremony. Kierkegaard refused to attend. He said the ceremony felt like a mask. He wanted to mourn in his own way, not follow a script. This act of refusal was a small but powerful example of the individual choosing his own path over tradition. Nietzsche, a German scholar, grew up in a different world. His father was a Lutheran pastor. When Nietzsche was 5, his father died suddenly from a brain disease. The boy watched his mother mourn alone, and he felt the loss of a strong guide. The death made him think hard about what gives life meaning. He later wrote, "God is dead," not as a joke, but as a way to say that the old moral code that people trusted no longer holds power for many. He urged people to create their own values. Nietzsche's reaction to his father's death is a clear anecdote. He wrote letters to his mother describing how the loss made him question the certainty of the church. He said the silence after his father's voice left a gap that he had to fill himself. He began to look for new ideas, new ways to live, instead of relying on old teachings. Both thinkers share a simple argument. They say that each person must find a personal truth. That truth is not given by the family, the church, or the state. It must be discovered by the individual. They argue that life is a series of choices, and each choice shapes who one becomes. In this view, authenticity means acting in line with that personal truth, not just copying what others do. A relatable example helps to see this idea. Imagine a young adult who wants to become an artist, but his family expects him to become a lawyer. The family says a law career is safe, respected, and brings money. The young adult feels a pull toward painting, toward color, toward expression. The existential idea says he must listen to his inner voice and decide for himself. If he chooses law, he may feel safe, but he may also feel a quiet loss of self. If he chooses art, he may face risk, but he may also feel alive. A second example is about a hobby. A teenager loves video games, but his friends all play sports. The teen wonders whether to join the team to fit in or to keep gaming because it brings joy. The existential view says the teen should ask what truly makes him feel whole. If he joins the team just to please others, he may lose his sense of self. If he stays with gaming, he may find his own path, even if it looks different from the group. These simple stories illustrate the core of early existential thought, the search for personal truth through individual choice. The idea is that each person is a project, always in the making, and that project is shaped by the choices one makes. Of course, not everyone agrees with this focus on the individual. One counterargument says that tradition provides safety. In a world where many things are uncertain, the old ways give a clear guide. A person who follows the family's career plan may avoid financial trouble, may have a support network, and may feel part of a larger story. This view holds that the collective wisdom of generations protects people from making harmful mistakes. A second counterargument says that collective values outweigh personal choice. In many societies, the good of the group is placed above the wishes of one person. The argument says that if everyone follows only their own path, society could fall apart. Traditions, laws, and shared customs keep people together. They give a sense of belonging that a single person may miss if they always go against the flow. These counterarguments are not ignored by Kierkegaard or Nietzsche. Kierkegaard admits that the crowd can be comforting, but he warns that comfort can become a cage. He writes, "The crowd is untruth." He means that when many people agree, it is easy to stop thinking for oneself. Nietzsche also sees the danger of losing the group. He writes, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." He suggests that a strong personal purpose can help a person face the hardships that come from stepping away from the crowd. The early seeds of existential thought also appear in everyday analogies. Think of a river that flows around rocks. The water does not fight the rock. It finds a new path. The river's shape changes, but it keeps moving forward. In the same way, a person may meet obstacles from tradition, but can still find a new way that reflects inner truth. Another analogy is a garden. A gardener can plant many kinds of flowers, each needing different soil and sunlight. If a gardener forces all plants to be the same, the garden loses its beauty. Allowing each plant to grow as it needs creates a richer, more vibrant space. This mirrors the idea that each person should be allowed to grow in their own way. History offers more moments that show these ideas in action. In 1843, Kierkegaard published a book called Either Or. In it, he presented two ways of living: the aesthetic life of pleasure and the ethical life of duty. He asked readers to choose which path felt true to them. The book caused a stir in Denmark because it challenged the idea that everyone should simply follow social duties. The reaction showed how powerful the call for personal choice could be. Later, in 1882, Nietzsche wrote The Gay Science. In it, he announced the death of God and invited people to become overmen, beings who create their own values. The book sparked debate across Europe. Some readers felt liberated, while others felt terrified. The controversy highlighted how radical the call for personal truth could be, especially when it seemed to reject the old moral order. These anecdotes help the viewer see how the ideas of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche were not just abstract thoughts. They were lived experiences that shook the societies of their time. Their writings inspired later philosophers to talk about freedom and authenticity. In later sections of this video, the discussion will move to how freedom means the ability to choose one's own path, and how authenticity means staying true to that choice. The early ideas of individuality and personal truth are the foundation for those later topics. Quotes from the original texts bring the voices of the thinkers to life. Kierkegaard wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." This reminds the audience that looking back helps make sense of choices. But the real work happens in the present moment, Nietzsche declared. "Come who you are." This short line captures the call to shape one's own identity, not to copy others. When the video returns to the theme of freedom, it will refer back to these early stories. The break with the church shows how Kierkegaard chose freedom over comfort. Nietzsche's reaction to his father's death shows how a personal loss can spark a quest for new freedom. Both illustrate that freedom is not just the lack of rules, but the courage to face the unknown and still act. When the video moves to authenticity, it will point to the career versus family example. The decision to follow a personal passion shows authenticity. The hobby example shows that even small daily choices can be authentic if they reflect inner truth. The river and garden analogies will be revisited to show how authenticity looks in nature and in life. In sum, the roots of existential thought lie in the lives of two daring men who asked simple but deep questions. They asked what it means to be a true self in a world full of expectations. They argued that each person must find a personal truth and act on it. They faced pushback from those who valued safety and tradition. Their stories, their quotes, and their analogies still speak to anyone who wonders how to live a life that feels real. The next part of the video will build on these ideas, showing how the early call for individuality grows into a broader discussion of freedom and authenticity. The viewer is invited to keep listening, to see how the seeds planted by Kierkegaard and Nietzsche blossom into a full philosophy that still matters today. Freedom and choice sit at the heart of existential thought. The core claim is simple. Each person is free to pick what to do, and that freedom carries a weight of responsibility. In the earlier roots section, the idea that existence comes before essence was introduced. That idea means that there is no fixed nature that tells a person what to be. Instead, each person builds a self through the choices that are made. The later sections on anxiety will show how that freedom can feel heavy, but for now, the focus is on how the claim works in everyday life. Jean-Paul Sartre is often the name most linked with the claim of radical freedom. In his famous lecture, he said, "Man is condemned to be free." The word condemned sounds harsh, but Sartre meant that there is no excuse for not choosing. Even when a person tries to hide behind circumstances, the act of not choosing is itself a choice. Simone de Beauvoir took the same idea and applied it to gender and social roles. She wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." The quote shows that gender is not a preset fact, but a pattern that is created by the choices people make and accept. Both writers stress that freedom is not a gift that can be taken for granted. It is a condition that demands action. To see how this works, imagine a simple scene in a restaurant. A person looks at a menu, sees many dishes, and picks a meal. The menu offers options, but the final decision rests with the diner. The act of choosing a steak or a salad tells something about the person's taste, health goals, or mood. If the diner decides to order a new dish, that decision creates a new experience and a new taste memory. The same pattern repeats in larger life choices. The restaurant example shows that freedom is present even in small, routine moments. A second, everyday picture involves a meeting at work. A team gathers and a problem is on the table. One person can stay silent or can speak up with an idea. Speaking up is a choice that may bring praise, criticism, or change. The decision to raise a voice shapes the flow of the meeting and can affect the whole project. If the person stays quiet, the meeting may continue without new input, and the person may later wonder what might have happened. This simple act of speaking up illustrates how freedom and responsibility travel together. The choice to act or not to act is always there. Sartre's view of freedom does not ignore limits. He argued that the world can push back, but the pushback itself is part of the situation in which a choice is made. For Sartre, the world offers facts, but the meaning of those facts is set by the chooser. De Beauvoir added that social structures can shape the options, yet she insisted that people can still choose how to respond. The idea is not that every action is easy, but that each action is still a product of a free will that must be owned. Two common counter-arguments appear when the claim of absolute freedom is examined. The first comes from biology. Some scientists say that genes, hormones, and brain chemistry set strong limits on what a person can do. A person who feels strong cravings for food or who suffers from depression may seem to act more like a machine than a free chooser. The biological view suggests that the brain's wiring narrows the range of possible actions, so freedom is only an illusion. In response, existential thinkers point out that even when biology pushes in a direction, a person can still decide how to interpret that push. A craving can be met, ignored, or redirected. The decision to seek help, to change diet, or to accept the feeling is still a choice, even if the feeling itself is biologically caused. The second counterargument comes from social pressure. A person may feel that family expectations, cultural norms, or peer groups dictate the right path. For example, a student may feel forced to study law because the family expects it, even if the student prefers art. Critics claim that such pressure removes true choice, turning actions into compliance. Existentialists answer that the pressure itself is a condition that must be faced. The student can choose to follow the family, to negotiate a compromise, or to break away. Each option carries consequences, and the act of weighing those consequences is itself an exercise of freedom. The presence of pressure does not erase freedom. It simply makes the responsibility clearer. History offers vivid stories that show how these ideas played out in real lives. In 1964, Sartre was offered the Nobel Prize in Literature. He wrote a letter refusing the award, saying that a writer should not become an institution. By turning down the prize, Sartre made a public choice that matched his belief that a person must remain free from external validation. He could have accepted the honor and enjoyed the fame, but he chose instead to stay true to his idea of freedom. The episode illustrates how even a prestigious award can become a test of personal responsibility. Simone de Beauvoir's wartime activism provides another illustration. During World War I, she joined the French resistance, helping to hide fugitives and distribute underground papers. The choice to risk her own safety for a cause that opposed the occupying forces was a direct expression of her belief that freedom demands action. De Beauvoir could have stayed safe in a quiet life, but she chose to act, accepting the danger as part of her responsibility to freedom. Her story shows how existential ideas can move from theory to life-changing deeds. Everyday life continues to echo these historic moments. When a person decides to quit a job that feels empty, that decision is a modern echo of Sartre's refusal of the Nobel. When a person stands up for a neighbor who is being treated unfairly, that act mirrors de Beauvoir's resistance work. The pattern remains. A clear choice, a sense of responsibility, and the willingness to face the result. The idea of freedom also links to the later discussion of anxiety. When a person realizes that each choice carries weight, a feeling of unease can appear. Existential anxiety is not a fear of something specific, but a feeling that comes from knowing that one must create meaning through choices. The anxiety section will explain how that feeling can motivate deeper reflection, or can become a source of paralysis if not understood. The connection shows that freedom is not a simple gift. It is a condition that shapes the whole emotional life. To make the concept even clearer, another analogy can be used. Think of a painter with a blank canvas. The canvas itself does not tell the painter what to paint. The painter can choose a landscape, an abstract swirl, or a portrait. Each brushstroke is a decision. Even if the painter feels limited by the colors available, the act of mixing new shades or using the brush in a different way is still a choice. The canvas does not force the painting. The painter does it. This picture mirrors how life offers a backdrop of facts, but the meaning comes from the choices made upon it. A final anecdote from the early existential movement adds depth. In 1945, a group of French intellectuals gathered in a small cafe to discuss what it meant to be free after the war. The meeting was informal, with coffee and cigarettes, but the conversation was intense. One participant, a young philosopher, declared that the war had stripped away many old rules, leaving a blank page for new values. The group's decision to keep meeting, to write essays, and to publish a journal called Existentialism was itself an act of collective freedom. They chose to shape a new intellectual direction rather than retreat into old comforts. Their story shows that freedom can be both personal and shared. The core claim that humans are free to choose their actions does not deny that the world can be hard. It simply says that the world does not decide for a person. Even when biology or society push in certain directions, the final say belongs to the chooser. That responsibility can feel heavy, but it also gives each person the power to shape a life that feels authentic. In practical terms, the claim of freedom can guide daily decisions. When a person picks a meal, they can think about health, budget, and pleasure. When a person decides whether to speak up in a meeting, they can weigh honesty, risk, and impact. Each small decision builds a larger picture of who the person is becoming. The freedom to choose, paired with the responsibility to own the outcome, becomes a tool for personal growth. Sartre's famous line, "We are our choices," captures the idea in a short phrase. De Beauvoir added, "Change your life today. Don't gamble on the future, act now, without delay." Both quotes push the listener to see that waiting for a perfect moment is itself a choice that can keep a person stuck. The message is that freedom is always present, even when it feels hidden. The discussion of freedom also connects to the concept of authenticity, a term that appears later in the series. Authenticity means living in a way that matches one's own choices, not merely following a script handed down by others. When a person acts authentically, they align actions with the freedom they have claimed. When they act inauthentically, they deny that freedom and let external forces take over. The idea of freedom has been tested in many fields beyond philosophy. In psychology, researchers study how people make decisions under pressure. In law, courts consider whether a defendant acted freely or was compelled. In art, creators speak about the freedom to break rules. All these areas echo the existential claim that freedom is a basic condition of human life, and that responsibility follows. To bring the ideas back to the everyday, consider a teenager who chooses a hobby. The teen can join a sports team, learn to play guitar, or spend time online. Each choice shapes how the teen spends free time, who the teen meets, and what skills are built. The teen may feel that friends or parents push toward a certain activity, but the final decision still rests with the teen. If the teen picks guitar, the teen learns music, meets other musicians, and perhaps discovers a future career. The responsibility for that path lies with the teen, not with the parents or the culture. Another example involves a shopper at a grocery store. The shopper sees a shelf of snacks that are cheap but unhealthy, and a shelf of fresh fruit that costs more. The shopper can pick the chips or can pick the apple. The decision reflects health goals, budget, and taste. Even if the shopper feels hungry, the act of choosing reflects freedom. The consequences, energy levels, health, money spent, are part of the responsibility that follows. These analogies, stories, and quotes all point back to the same claim. Humans are free to choose, and that freedom carries responsibility. The claim does not ignore limits, but it insists that limits are part of the situation in which a choice is made. The refusal of the Nobel Prize, the wartime work of de Beauvoir, the cafe meeting after the war, the painter at the canvas, the teenager with a hobby, and the shopper in the aisle, all show how freedom appears in many forms. In the next part of the series, the feeling that comes with this freedom will be explored. Anxiety, doubt, and even dread can arise when the weight of choice is felt. Understanding that anxiety is a natural companion to freedom can help people use it as a guide rather than a block. The journey from freedom to responsibility to anxiety forms a path that many existential thinkers have walked. To close the segment on freedom and choice, a reminder of the core idea is useful. Freedom is not a distant, abstract notion. It is present in each moment of decision. Whether one is picking a meal, speaking in a meeting, refusing an award, or joining a resistance, the act of choosing is the same. Responsibility follows, and it is the price of living an authentic life. The words of Sartre and de Beauvoir still echo. Each person must own the choices made, and in doing so, each person creates a self that is truly their own. The story of absurdity begins with a simple feeling that many people share. It is the sense that the world does not hand out a clear purpose, that the sky does not whisper a plan, and yet each day people still set goals, make promises, and build lives. This tension is at the heart of existentialism, a movement that grew in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The roots can be traced to Søren Kierkegaard, who warned that the human heart longs for a meaning that reason cannot supply. Friedrich Nietzsche later added that traditional values had collapsed, leaving a void that each person must fill. Jean-Paul Sartre declared that existence precedes essence, meaning that people first appear in the world and then must decide what they are. Albert Camus, the focus of this section, took the idea a step further by naming the gap between the desire for meaning and the silent universe, the absurd. Camus first wrote about the absurd in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. He described a moment when a person looks at the sky, at the endless stretch of time, and feels a quiet, stubborn emptiness. He said the absurd is born of the clash between the human need for meaning and the indifferent world. He wrote, "The absurd is the confrontation between the human yearning for order and the indifferent silence of the world. In simple terms, imagine a broken clock that still shows the same time every hour. A person can still plan a day, set an alarm, and go to work, even though the clock does not give a true reading. The broken clock represents the universe that does not answer the question of why. The planning of the day shows how people act as if there is a rhythm, as if meaning exists, even when the clock is silent." Camus used this image to show that life can feel like a broken clock, but people keep moving forward. The argument can be broken down into 3 clear steps. First, there is the recognition that the world offers no obvious answer to the question of purpose. Second, there is the feeling of frustration that this lack creates. Third, there is the choice to keep acting, to create personal meaning despite the lack of a universal answer. Camus believed that the choice itself is an act of freedom. By accepting the absurd, a person does not fall into despair. Instead, they decide to live fully, to love, to work, to create art, because those actions become their own meaning. A common everyday example helps to see this. Think of a TV show that repeats the same jokes episode after episode. After a while, the viewer feels bored, aware that the story does not grow. Yet the viewer may still sit down each night, because the routine gives a sense of comfort, because the act of watching becomes a small personal ritual. The show itself does not promise a deep purpose, but the viewer's choice to keep watching shows how people fill the empty space with their own reasons. A second example is cleaning a room that never stays tidy. Dust settles again, clothes pile up again. The task seems endless, like a loop with no final result. Still, a person cleans, because the act of cleaning creates order for a moment, and that moment feels worthwhile. The room's mess does not disappear forever, but the effort gives a feeling of control, a tiny answer to the larger sense of chaos. These examples illustrate how the absurd works in daily life. They also show how people can respond with humor, with love, with work. Camus said that the proper response to the absurd is not resignation, but revolt. He used the myth of Sisyphus, a king condemned to roll a stone up a hill, only for it to roll back down each time. Camus imagined Sisyphus smiling, because the struggle itself becomes his purpose. The stone does not disappear, but the act of pushing it gives Sisyphus a sense of agency. In the same way, a person who cleans a messy room or watches a repetitive show can find a small sense of agency in the act. Not everyone agrees with Camus. One counterargument comes from religious thought. Many religions claim that meaning is given by a higher power, that a divine plan already exists. In this view, the feeling of absurdity is a sign of lack of faith, not a universal condition. A believer might answer the broken clock by saying that the clock is set by God, and the purpose is already written. This belief removes the need for personal revolt, because meaning is already supplied. The second counterargument comes from the idea that purpose is built through community goals. Some philosophers argue that meaning arises when people work together towards shared projects, such as building a school, protecting the environment, or creating a piece of music. In this view, the absurd is softened by the fact that individuals are not alone. They belong to a larger story. The community gives a framework that replaces the empty sky with a network of relationships. Both counterarguments have merit, and they each push back against Camus in different ways. The religious view offers comfort, but it also asks the believer to accept a set of answers that may not be provable. The community view highlights the power of collaboration, but it can still leave the individual wondering what happens when the group dissolves. Camus acknowledged these points. He wrote, "I rebel, therefore I exist." The rebellion is not a denial of faith or community, but a personal decision to keep moving forward, even when larger answers are missing. The historical record shows how Camus lived his ideas. During World War I, he worked with the French resistance, writing for the underground newspaper Combat. He risked his life to spread information, to give people a sense of purpose in a time of oppression. This work was not a theoretical exercise. It was a direct action that showed how a person can choose to act in spite of absurd conditions. Later, after the war, Camus faced a trial for his political writings. He was accused of supporting ideas that some considered dangerous. In the courtroom, he defended his right to speak, insisting that truth must be pursued even when it brings danger. The trial became a real-world example of the absurd. A writer confronting a system that seemed indifferent to his personal search for meaning, yet still standing firm. These anecdotes help to see how the abstract idea of absurdity can shape real choices. Camus did not stay in a quiet study. He walked the streets of occupied Paris, he wrote pamphlets, he faced a judge. His life shows that the absurd can be a call to act, not a reason to hide. It also links directly to the concept of freedom that runs through existentialism. If a person can choose how to respond to a meaningless world, then that choice is a form of freedom. This freedom is not the ability to do anything without consequence, but the ability to decide what matters, even when the universe does not dictate it. Modern thinkers have taken Camus' idea and applied it to new fields. In psychology, the concept of meaning therapy helps patients find personal purpose after trauma, echoing Camus' call to create meaning. In technology, designers talk about meaningful user experiences, trying to give digital tools a sense of purpose beyond mere function. In environmental activism, people speak of finding meaning in stewardship, using the absurd as a reason to protect the planet because the planet itself does not ask for it. Each of these modern uses shows that the absurd still matters today. A concrete modern example can be found in the life of a freelance artist who streams their work online. The artist knows that the internet is a vast, indifferent space where millions of videos are watched and forgotten. Yet the artist continues to paint, to share the process, to talk with viewers. The absurd is present. The world does not promise that anyone will notice. Still, the artist finds purpose in the act of creation and in the small connections that form. Another example comes from a nurse working night shifts in a busy hospital. The nurse sees suffering, sees patients who may not recover, and yet keeps caring, because the act of caring gives a personal sense of value. The hospital does not guarantee a happy ending, but the nurse's daily actions become a personal answer to the absurd. Analogies help to keep the idea clear. Picture a child building a sandcastle on a beach. The tide will eventually wash it away, no matter how carefully the child works. The child knows this, yet still builds, adding towers, carving doors. The effort is not wasted. It is the building itself that brings joy. The tide represents the indifferent universe. The sandcastle represents personal projects. The child's choice to build mirrors the human choice to act despite the absurd. Another analogy is a musician playing a song that no one else will ever hear. The notes fade into silence, but the musician feels the rhythm, the flow, the personal satisfaction. The silence after the song is like the quiet of the universe, but the act of playing is the personal response. Camus' own words give a clear picture of the feeling he wanted to capture. He wrote, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." This line shows that even when the world feels cold and empty, a person can find a warm inner drive. He also said, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." Both quotes stress that freedom is the tool to meet the absurd, and that rebellion is not violent, but a quiet, steady decision to live fully. The discussion of absurdity also sets the stage for later topics in existential ethics. If a person can choose meaning in a meaningless world, then they also choose how to treat others, how to act justly, how to build a life that respects freedom. The next section will explore how this freedom leads to ethical choices, how responsibility grows when meaning is self-made. The link is clear. The same rebellion that makes a person push the stone up the hill also pushes them to consider the impact of that push on the people around them. To sum up, the concept of absurdity tells a story that many can recognize. It starts with a feeling that the world does not hand out a ready answer. It moves through frustration, then to a choice to act anyway. Albert Camus gave the name the absurd to this gap, and he offered the image of a broken clock, of Sisyphus, of a rebel who smiles while pushing a stone. Everyday life shows the idea in watching a repetitive show, cleaning a messy room, building a sandcastle, or playing a private song. Two strong counter-arguments, religious meaning and community purpose, show that other paths exist, but they do not erase the core tension. Historical moments from Camus' resistance work and his courtroom defense give a real-world face to the abstract. Modern thinkers keep the idea alive in therapy, design, and activism. The core lesson is that freedom to choose remains, and that choice becomes the seed of meaning. In the next part of the journey, that seed will grow into questions of right and wrong, of how a free person can live ethically in an absurd world. The idea of authenticity sits at the heart of existential thought. It asks each person to own the choices that shape a life, to see freedom not as a distant ideal, but as a daily task. In the same way, the notion of bad faith describes the opposite path, the habit of pretending that freedom does not belong to the self. When a person hides behind a mask, the mask becomes a way to avoid the weight of responsibility. This tension between living true to oneself and living in denial of one's freedom has been explored by many writers, most famously by Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre wrote that man is condemned to be free. The word condemned does not mean punishment. It means that once consciousness appears, there is no escape from the fact that every action is chosen. To claim that a situation forces a single response is to deny that very freedom. Bad faith, then, is the lie one tells oneself in order to keep the feeling of freedom at bay. It is a self-deception that turns the open horizon of choice into a closed door. Consider a simple scene at a high school cafeteria. A student named Maya hears the latest pop hit on the speakers. The song is everywhere, on phones, on radios, on the teacher's playlist. Maya does not feel the rhythm. She does not enjoy the lyrics. Yet, When a friend asks, "Do you like the new track?" she smiles, nods, and says, "It's great." She tells herself that she is just being polite, that she wants to fit in. In reality, Maya is hiding her true taste to avoid the discomfort of standing out. The act of pretending creates a small but clear case of bad faith. She chooses the safe answer, not because the song compels her, but because she wants to keep the social pressure at bay. The freedom to say, "Why don't like it," is present, yet she blocks it. A second everyday example unfolds in an office. Thomas works as a data analyst for a large corporation. The paycheck is steady, the benefits are good, and the job offers a clear path to promotion. Yet Thomas' heart belongs to photography. He spends evenings with a camera, dreaming of a gallery. Each morning he tells himself that he must stay for the money, that his passion can wait. He tells himself that the world needs his analytical skills more than his art. In this story, Thomas lives in a state of bad faith. He pretends that his job is his true calling, ignoring the inner pull toward a different life. The freedom to change careers is real, but Thomas hides behind the safety of a salary. Both scenarios show how people can hide from freedom. The first hides behind a social mask, the second behind a financial mask. In each case, the mask serves as a shield against the anxiety that comes with making an authentic choice. Sartre argued that this shielding is itself a choice, and therefore it is part of the very freedom it tries to escape. The drama of bad faith is not only a modern concern. Sartre's own play, No Exit, offers a vivid illustration. Three characters find themselves locked together in a room after death. Each tries to convince the others, and themselves, that they are not responsible for their past actions. Garcin, for example, claims that his cowardice was forced upon him by the expectations of his country. He refuses to see that he chose to act in a certain way. When he finally acknowledges his choice, the room seems to close in tighter. The line, "Hell is other people," captures the idea that the gaze of others can force a person into a role that hides true freedom. The character's denial of responsibility is a theatrical version of bad faith. A historical anecdote from the 19th century adds another layer. In the industrial city of Manchester, a young factory worker named Thomas Whitfield earned a modest wage turning cotton. He was known among his peers for his quiet acceptance of the long hours and the soot-covered life. One evening, a visiting reformer asked him, "Do you wish for something else?" Whitfield answered, "Why, I am content. This is my lot." Later, a diary entry from a fellow worker revealed that Thomas had once dreamed of becoming a schoolteacher, but he buried that dream to avoid the shame of failure. He told himself that the factory was his destiny, that any other path would be unrealistic. His silence about his true desire illustrates bad faith in a time when social mobility was limited. The story shows that the pressure to accept a role can be so strong that it leads a person to deny inner wishes. These stories do not imply that every compromise is bad faith. Some counterarguments stress that certain roles truly require sacrifice. A soldier, for instance, may put personal desires aside to protect a nation. A parent may stay in a demanding job to provide for children. In such cases, the choice to accept limits can be seen as an act of love rather than self-deception. The first counterargument holds that authenticity is not an excuse to abandon duty. It argues that responsibility sometimes means putting the needs of others above the pull of personal passion. This view suggests that authenticity must be balanced with the reality of social obligations. A second counterargument points out that social masks can protect mental health. People who hide certain feelings may avoid conflict, bullying, or discrimination. A teenager who pretends to like a popular song may do so to avoid being isolated. The mask, in this view, is a coping tool rather than a lie. It can keep a person safe in a hostile environment. The argument says that authenticity is a luxury that not everyone can afford at all times. The mask can be a temporary shelter while the person works toward a more open future. Both counterarguments have merit. The story begins where the earlier talk on absurdity left off. In that part, the idea was that life can feel empty when there is no clear meaning. The next step is to ask how a person can act when they see that life has no set plan. The answer brings the feeling of anxiety. Anxiety is not just fear of danger. It is a deeper nervousness that comes from the knowledge that each person is free to choose, and that each choice shapes what it means to be alive. Heidegger called this feeling being toward death. He wrote that every human being is always moving toward the end of life, even when the end is far away. That knowledge makes each moment feel urgent. He said, "Being toward death is the most authentic way of existing." In simple words, the awareness that life can end at any time pushes a person to feel a tight knot in the chest. That knot is what philosophers call existential anxiety. Imagine a person standing at a crossroads. One road leads to a quiet town, the other to a bustling city. The sky is clear, but the person feels a flutter in the stomach. The picture is a way to see the idea. The crossroads is the place where freedom shows itself. The person can pick any direction, but the choice also means that the other road is left behind forever. That loss, even if it has not yet happened, creates a nervous feeling. The person knows that the choice is theirs alone, and that the future will unfold because of that choice. Everyday life gives many small versions of this picture. Think of a student who is about to take a big exam. The student has studied, but the moment before the test begins feels like a small storm inside. The student knows that the result will affect future plans, and that the result is not set by anyone else. The feeling of nervousness is not just about the questions on the paper. It is about the fact that the student is free to answer, and that each answer will shape a future that cannot be undone. The same feeling appears when a person goes on a first date. The person knows that the date could lead to a lasting relationship, or it could end quickly. The person is free to speak, to act, to be honest, or to hide. The awareness of that freedom makes the heart beat faster. The anxiety is not only about the other person, but about the open possibilities that lie ahead. Heidegger's own life shows how this anxiety can appear in the world of ideas. In the early 1920s, he was a professor at a German university. He taught students about being, about time, and about death. At the same time, he became involved with a political movement that later caused great controversy. When the public learned of his political choices, many students felt shocked. They wondered whether the thinker who talked about freedom could also support a group that tried to limit freedom for others. The reaction was a mix of disappointment and nervousness. People asked themselves whether the ideas about freedom were just words, or whether they could survive in a world where politics tried to control thought. That public reaction is a real example of how the idea of freedom can cause anxiety not only in the mind of a single person, but in a whole community. A second historical anecdote comes from a soldier in World War II. The soldier was in a trench, hearing the sound of artillery. He knew that death could come at any moment. He also knew that his actions, whether to stay quiet or to fire back, would affect the lives of his comrades. In a quiet moment, he thought of the future he might never see. He felt a tight knot in his chest, a nervousness that was not just fear of the next bomb, but a deeper feeling that his life was his own to shape, even as death loomed. After the war, the soldier wrote letters that said, "When the guns stopped, I still felt the weight of the choices I made. The fear was not only of being shot, but of being responsible for the path I took." This story shows that being toward death is not an abstract idea. It lived in the mind of a person who faced real danger. Some people say that anxiety is only a chemical issue. They point to brain scans that show certain chemicals rise when a person feels nervous. They claim that if the chemicals are balanced, the nervous feeling disappears. This view treats anxiety as a medical problem, not a philosophical one. From that perspective, the feeling that comes from freedom is just a side effect of an unbalanced brain. Another common claim is that routine removes existential worry. The argument is that when a person follows a set schedule, work, meals, sleep, the mind has less room to think about big questions. The idea is that a busy life keeps the mind occupied, so there is no time to feel anxious about freedom or death. People who follow this view often say that a simple, predictable life is the best way to stay calm. Both of these counterarguments miss a key point. The chemical view does not explain why a person can feel anxiety even when there is no obvious danger. A student can feel the knot before the exam, even if the brain chemistry is normal. A person can feel the knot at a crossroads, even if the heart beats at a normal rate. The feeling is tied to the sense that a choice is being made. The routine view also falls short. A person who works the same hours every day can still feel anxiety when a sudden change appears. A promotion, a loss, a health news. Routine may delay the feeling, but it does not erase the underlying freedom that makes the feeling possible. The modern world offers many places where this anxiety shows up. In the age of social media, each person can post a picture, write a status, or share an opinion with a click. That click is a small act of freedom. Yet each post also opens the person to judgment, to comparison, to the feeling that the chosen image may not be the right one. The nervousness that follows a post is a modern version of the crossroads feeling. It is a tiny version of the same anxiety that Heidegger described. Another modern example is the gig economy. A driver for a ride-share service can choose when to work, where to drive, and how long to stay online. The driver feels the pull of freedom, but also the pull of uncertainty. The driver wonders whether the next ride will pay enough, whether the car will break down, whether the platform will change its rules. The anxiety here is not about a bomb, but about the open possibilities that come with each free decision. Philosophers after Heidegger kept the idea alive. Sartre, for example, said that existence precedes essence. In simple terms, this means that a person first exists, then decides what to become. Sartre wrote, "Man is condemned to be free." The word condemned shows that freedom can feel like a punishment because it forces a person to choose. That choice brings anxiety. Kierkegaard, an earlier thinker, used the word dread to talk about the same feeling. He wrote, "Dread is the dizziness of freedom." The word the dizziness is like the feeling of standing at a crossroads and feeling the wind spin. These ideas have been taken into modern psychology as well. Existential therapy, a type of counseling, works with the feeling of anxiety that comes from freedom and death. The therapist helps a person see that the nervous feeling is not a sign of weakness, but a sign that the person is aware of their own power to choose. The therapy does not try to remove the feeling, but to help the person use it as a guide toward a more authentic life. Authenticity, as discussed earlier, means living in a way that matches one's true self, not just following habits or expectations. The link between anxiety and authenticity is clear. When a person hides behind routine, they may avoid the nervous feeling, but they also avoid the chance to live truly. When a person faces the anxiety, they can ask themselves what they really want, and then act on it. That is why the earlier section on authenticity matters here. The anxiety is a signal that a choice is being made. The signal can be ignored, but then the choice may be made without thought. Listening to the signal can lead to a more honest life. To bring the idea back to the simple picture, Imagine again the person at the crossroads. One path leads to a safe, familiar town. The other leads to a new city with unknown streets. The nervous feeling tells the person that the choice matters. If the person chooses the safe town, they may feel relief, but also a lingering thought. What if the other road had been better? If the person chooses the new city, they may feel fear, but also a sense of excitement that comes from acting on freedom. In both cases, the anxiety is the same, and it is a sign that the person is truly free to shape their life. A final example helps to lock the idea in place. A teenager is about to apply for a college. The teenager knows that the choice will affect the next 4 years, the friendships, the career. The teenager feels a tight knot in the stomach. The knot is not because of a test, but because the teenager knows that the decision is theirs alone. The teenager can talk to parents, read guides, but ultimately the final click on the application button is a free act. The anxiety that comes with that click is the same feeling that Heidegger called being towards death. It is the feeling that the future is open, and that the future will close behind the chosen door. In sum, the awareness of freedom creates a specific kind of nervous feeling. That feeling was named being toward death by Heidegger, and it shows up whenever a person stands at a crossroads, whether that crossroads is a literal road, a first date, an exam, a social media post, or a career decision. Historical stories from Heidegger's own academic life and from a World War I soldier illustrate how the feeling has lived in real people. Counterarguments that blame chemistry or routine do not capture the core of the feeling, which is tied to the knowledge that each choice shapes one's own being. Modern life gives new places for the feeling to appear, but the core idea stays the same. By recognizing the anxiety as a sign of freedom, a person can move toward a more authentic life, turning the nervous knot into a guide rather than a block. The journey from absurdity to authenticity, as explored earlier, ends at this point. The nervous feeling is not an enemy, but a companion that reminds each person that they are free to write their own story. Existential ethics begins with the idea that freedom is not a gift that can be ignored. It is a call to act. When a person knows that they are free, they also know that they must take responsibility for what they do. This idea was first put into words by Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. Their work shows how each choice builds the world around us. In this part of the video, the story of a small choice about waste will be used to see how freedom becomes moral duty. Then 2 everyday examples will be given, 2 strong objections will be heard, and 2 moments from history will be recalled. All of this will link back to the earlier ideas of freedom, authenticity, and anxiety. The story starts in a quiet kitchen. A person comes home after work. The trash bin is full of plastic wrappers, paper cups, and a broken bottle. The person looks at a recycling bin that sits nearby. The mind asks, should this be put in the recycle or just tossed in the trash? The choice seems tiny. Yet, the freedom to decide is real. If the person puts the items in the recycle, they act in a way that respects the planet. If they throw everything away, they ignore the impact of their freedom. The simple act becomes a test of responsibility. The person feels a small knot of anxiety, a feeling that comes when freedom is real. The knot pushes the person to think about the consequences of the choice. The decision to recycle is a small step toward a larger moral pattern. It shows how freedom can lead to a sense of duty. Sartre wrote, "Man is condemned to be free." He meant that no one can escape the fact that they must choose. That choice does not happen in a vacuum. It shapes the world and shapes the chooser. Sartre added that each choice also defines humanity. When a person decides to recycle, they are saying, "I will care for the world that other people share." In doing so, they help to shape a future where care for the environment is normal. The choice is not just about a bottle. It is about the kind of world that will be left for others. Sartre's claim that choices shape humanity is clear in this tiny act. De Beauvoir's ethics of ambiguity adds another layer. She wrote that humans are both free and bound. The person in the kitchen is free to choose, but also bound by the fact that the planet needs care. De Beauvoir said, "The ambiguous human being is a being who is both free and bound." That sentence tells us that freedom always comes with limits. The limits are the other people, the other living things, the world itself. When the person recycles, they accept those limits. They do not pretend that they can act without consequence. They see that their freedom is tied to the well-being of others. That is the core of de Beauvoir's ethical view. To act responsibly, one must recognize the web of connections that bind us. Now the story moves to two more everyday moments. First, imagine a person walking down a street market. A shopper drops a bag of groceries. The bag spills, and the items roll onto the pavement. A stranger pauses. The mind asks, "Do I stop and help?" The freedom to help is there. If the stranger steps in, they take responsibility for another's need. If they keep walking, they leave the person to struggle alone. The choice again shows how freedom creates moral duty. The stranger feels a quick pulse of anxiety, a small fear of stepping into another's problem. But the same feeling also pushes toward action. Helping the shopper is a small act of kindness that says, "Why care about the people around me?" It is an example of how existential freedom can become a caring habit. Second, consider the act of voting in an election. On a crisp November day, a citizen stands in line with a ballot. The mind asks, "Will I vote?" The freedom to vote is a right given by the state. But the right also brings responsibility. If the citizen votes, they help shape the laws that affect everyone. If they stay home, they let others decide without their voice. The decision to vote is a larger-scale version of the recycling choice. It shows how personal freedom can affect a whole community. The anxiety that comes before the vote is the same feeling that Sartre described as the weight of freedom. It can be uncomfortable, but it also drives the citizen to act. Both examples, helping a stranger and voting, show that existential ethics is not just a theory for philosophers. It is a guide for daily life. The idea is that each free act carries a moral weight. The weight is not a punishment, but a sign that the person is part of a larger human story. When the person chooses to recycle, to help, or to vote, they are building that story. Now, two strong objections will be heard. The first objection says that moral rules are fixed by society. Some people believe that right and wrong are set by laws, religion, or tradition. They say, "You do not need to think about each choice. Follow the rule." From that view, freedom is less important than obedience. The objection claims that if everyone follows the same rule, there is no need for personal responsibility. The argument is that society already gives us a map, so we do not need to make moral decisions on our own. The second objection says that personal responsibility is too heavy for individuals. It argues that the world is too big, and that one person cannot change it. The claim is that feeling forced to act on every choice creates stress and burnout. Some say, leave the big problems to governments or experts. This view treats freedom as a burden rather than an opportunity. Both objections have merit, and they are part of the ongoing conversation in existential thought. Sartre answered the first objection by reminding that even when a rule exists, a person must still choose to follow it. The choice to obey or to reject a rule is itself a free act. If a person follows a rule without thinking, they are still responsible for that choice. Devore answered the second objection by pointing out that the feeling of anxiety is a sign that one is alive and can act. She said that to avoid anxiety by refusing to act is to deny one's own humanity. She urged people to see responsibility not as a weight, but as a chance to create meaning. Historical anecdotes bring these ideas to life. After World War I, Simone de Beauvoir turned her existential ideas into a fight for women's rights. She wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." The line comes from her book, The Second Sex. In the years after the war, she worked with women who had survived the conflict. She helped them claim the right to work, to study, and to vote. Her activism showed how freedom and responsibility can be used to change a whole society. She did not wait for a fixed rule about gender. She used her freedom to act, and she took responsibility for the lives of many women. Her life is a living example of the ethics of ambiguity. She saw that women were bound by social expectations, but she also saw that they were free to change those expectations through action. Jean-Paul Sartre also gave a public example of existential responsibility. In the 1950s, he took part in heated debates about French colonialism in Algeria. He argued that the French people could not hide behind the idea of the empire as a fixed rule. He said, "Freedom is the source of all our actions, even the ones that hurt others." He stood in front of crowds and wrote articles that challenged the government's claim that colonial rule was inevitable. His public stance showed that even a famous philosopher felt the pressure of responsibility. He used his freedom to speak out, and he accepted the risk that his words might cause anger or even danger. The debates illustrate how existential ethics can be applied to big political issues, not just personal choices. Modern interpretations keep the same core idea. Today, many thinkers talk about ethical freedom in the context of climate change. They say that each person's daily habits, like recycling or using a bike, add up to a global impact. The same language that Sartre used, choice shaping humanity, appears in modern climate activism. People say, if we all choose to act, we change the planet. The idea of responsibility is also used in technology. When a programmer writes code that decides who sees what online, they face the same question. Do I use my freedom to help or to harm? The existential view reminds them that they cannot hide behind the fact that the system does it. Their freedom makes them responsible for the outcomes. Another modern example is the rise of digital consent. When a user clicks "agree" on a privacy policy, they are using their freedom to accept or reject data collection. The choice may seem tiny, but it shapes how personal data is used. The anxiety that comes from not knowing what the terms mean pushes people to read more, to demand clearer language. In this way, existential ethics helps people see that even small digital choices are part of a larger moral picture. To bring the ideas together, an analogy can be used. Imagine a garden. Each plant is a choice. The gardener has the freedom to plant seeds, water them, or let them die. The garden's health depends on the gardener's responsibility. If the gardener ignores the weeds, the garden will become overrun. If the gardener tends to each plant, the garden will flourish. The garden is like society. Each choice, recycling, helping a stranger, voting, speaking out, acts as a seed. The gardener's anxiety about the garden's future is the same as the existential feeling of responsibility. The garden will show the results of each choice over time. Another analogy compares freedom to a road. The road stretches ahead, and the driver can turn left or right at each junction. The driver cannot claim that the road decides for them. Each turn changes the destination. If the driver chooses a path that leads to a dead end, they must accept that result. If they choose a path that leads to a scenic view, they share that view with passengers. The road is like life. The driver's freedom to steer creates responsibility for where the passengers end up. This picture helps explain why existential ethics sees freedom as the source of moral duty. Linking back to earlier sections, the idea of freedom was first introduced as the basic condition of human life. Authenticity, the next idea, means acting in line with one's true self, not just following a crowd. Anxiety, the feeling that comes with freedom, was shown as a sign that a person is aware of the weight of choice. In the recycling story, the anxiety felt at the trash can is exactly the same feeling that was described earlier. The person's decision to act in line with their values shows authenticity. The responsibility that follows is the moral part of the story. All three ideas, freedom, authenticity, anxiety, work together to form existential ethics. Now the main argument can be laid out step by step. First, freedom is a fact of human existence. No one can escape the need to choose. Second, each choice is a moral act because it affects other people and the world. Third, the feeling of anxiety signals that the choice matters. Fourth, acting authentically means listening to that anxiety and making a choice that reflects one's values. Fifth, responsibility follows from the choice. It is not a punishment, but a natural result of being free. This chain of ideas is what Sartre and de Beauvoir tried to show. The argument can be summed up in a short story. A student named Maya sees a classmate drop a notebook. She can pick it up or ignore it. She feels a quick pulse of worry. She thinks about what she believes. Helping others is right. She decides to pick up the notebook and hand it back. Maya's freedom let her choose. Her anxiety told her the choice mattered. Her act was authentic to her belief. The responsibility she took was simply to help. In this tiny moment, Maya shaped a small part of her world. If she had ignored the notebook, the classmate would have been frustrated, and Maya would have missed a chance to act. The story shows how each free act adds up. The counterarguments are not dismissed lightly. The view that society already gives clear rules can be useful. Laws and traditions do help guide many people. However, Sartre would say that even when a law exists, a person still must choose to obey it. If a law is unjust, the choice to break it is also a free act. De Beauvoir would add that the law may not cover every situation. The ambiguity of life means that each person must think for themselves. The claim that responsibility is too heavy can be answered by pointing out that responsibility can be shared. When many people act responsibly, recycling, voting, helping, each person's burden becomes lighter. The feeling of anxiety can be eased by seeing that one is. Existentialism in literature and art shows how stories and pictures can ask big questions about life, freedom, and meaning. In this part of the video, the calm voice explains how novels, plays, and paintings become tools for an idea that life does not come with a built-in purpose. The idea is that each person must choose a path and own the result. That simple message appears again and again in works that many people know. The roots of this artistic turn go back to the 19th century. Søren Kierkegaard wrote about the leap of faith and the feeling of being alone in a crowd. Friedrich Nietzsche declared that God is dead and that people must make their own values. Those thoughts did not stay in philosophy books. They slipped into stories and pictures. The first novels that felt like a personal diary of choice and doubt appeared in the early 1900s. The mood of those works matched the mood of a world that had seen 2 wars and a fast rise of technology. Albert Camus is a central figure. He called his view the absurd. The absurd is the clash between the human need for meaning and a world that does not give it. In his novel, The Stranger, the main character Meursault lives without the usual feelings of grief or joy. He watches a funeral, feels no sorrow, and later faces a court that judges him more for his lack of feeling than for the crime he committed. Camus writes, "I opened my eyes and saw the world as it was." That line tells the reader that the world can be seen without the filter of expectation. The novel shows how a simple, honest look can be frightening to a society that wants comfort. Camus also wrote an essay called The Myth of Sisyphus, where he says that the only real answer to the absurd is to keep moving, like Sisyphus rolling a stone up a hill only to watch it fall. That image appears in many paintings. Edvard Munch. The Scream shows a figure on a bridge, hands on ears, shouting at a sky that seems to melt. The figure looks alone, but the bridge suggests a crossing, a choice between staying where the scream began or stepping forward. The picture can be read as a visual version of Camus' stone. The figure does not know if the stone will ever rest, but still walks. Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot is another key work. Two men, Vladimir and Estragon, wait for a person named Godot who never arrives. They talk, argue, and repeat the same jokes. The play is short, but the silence between the lines is loud. Beckett writes, "Nothing to be done." That short line captures the feeling of waiting for meaning that never comes. The play asks whether waiting itself is a choice or a trap. It also shows that even a simple waiting can become an act of defiance if the characters decide to stay together. Both Camus and Beckett share a focus on authenticity. Authenticity means living in a way that matches one's true self, not the expectations of others. In The Stranger, Meursault refuses to pretend he feels what society expects at a funeral. In Waiting for Godot, the two men keep talking even when the conversation feels empty, because it is the only thing they have. The calm narrator links these scenes back to the earlier section on authenticity, reminding the viewer that being true to oneself is a core part of existential thought. The ideas do not stay in books. Real-world applications appear when people read a novel and feel a shift in how they see their own choices. A therapist might ask a client to think of a scene from The Stranger and ask what it feels like to face a judgment that is based on inner honesty. A teacher might use the waiting scene from Beckett to show students how to talk about the feeling of being stuck in life. In both cases, the art becomes a mirror for personal reflection. Modern interpretations keep the same spirit. In the novel The Road by Cormac McCarthy, a father and son travel through a burned world, looking for meaning in a place that seems empty. The novel echoes Camus' absurd because the world offers no clear purpose, yet the characters choose to protect each other. In contemporary visual art, the painter Jenny Saville often shows bodies that are raw and unidealized. Her work can be read as a claim that the body itself, without decoration, can be a source of authentic truth. These modern works show that existential ideas still travel through art. Everyday analogies help the listener feel the ideas. Imagine a driver stuck in a traffic jam on a hot afternoon. The driver looks at the line of cars and thinks about how each vehicle moves forward or stops. The driver can feel angry, bored, or free to think about the road ahead. The jam becomes a picture of life's direction. The driver may decide to stay calm and watch the sky, or may decide to take a different route later. That simple scene shows the same choice that Meursault makes when he decides not to hide his feelings, and the same waiting that Vladimir feels as he watches the road ahead. A second analogy uses a painting of a lone figure on a bridge. The figure stands at the middle, looking at water below and sky above. The bridge can be crossed, but the figure can also stay where he is. The painting does not tell which side is better, only that the figure must decide. That moment matches the idea of authenticity. The figure can be true to his own desire, whether that is to step forward or to stay still. The image is like the stone that Sisyphus rolls. The effort is the choice, not the final landing. Two counterarguments appear in discussions about art and existentialism. The first claim says that art is only about beauty, not about ideas. Those who hold this view argue that a painting's colors and shapes are meant to please the eye, not to teach a philosophy. They might point to a landscape that shows a sunset without any deeper meaning. In response, the calm narrator notes that even a simple landscape can become a stage for existential thought when a viewer asks why the sunset matters to them. The act of asking turns the picture into a question about meaning. The second counterargument says that literature cannot teach philosophy because it is a story, not a logical argument. Critics say that a novel's plot can be messy and that readers may miss the hidden ideas. In reply, the narrator points out that philosophy itself began as stories. Plato used dialogues, and the early Greeks told myths to explore ideas about virtue. A story can show a concept in lived form, which often makes it clearer than a formal definition. The novel, The Stranger, does not list a definition of the absurd, but it lets the reader feel the absurd through the character's actions. That feeling can be more powerful than a textbook sentence. Historical anecdotes add depth. When The Stranger first appeared in post-war France, many readers were shocked by the lack of emotion in the protagonist. Some critics called the book cold and dangerous. Others praised it as a brave look at a world that had just seen massive loss. The novel caused a public debate about whether society should expect people to show grief in a certain way. The debate helped spread Camus' idea that personal honesty can clash with social expectation. Another anecdote tells of the first performance of Waiting for Godot in a small Irish theatre in 1953. The stage was simple, with only a tree made of a single branch. The audience was used to lively comedies, so the silence and waiting felt strange. Some people laughed nervously, others left early. The playwright, Samuel Beckett, stayed after the show and listened to the mixed reactions. He later said that the audience discomfort was exactly what he wanted, a reminder that people often avoid facing the emptiness that waits behind daily routine. The story of that first night shows how a work can test the limits of what people accept as theatre. Quotes from the original works give a direct voice to the ideas. Camus writes, I opened my eyes and saw the world as it was. Beckett writes, nothing to be done. In the scream, Munch's figure seems to scream, I am a man of the world, but I am a man of the world, but I am a man of my own. These lines, though brief, carry the weight of the whole philosophy. They are spoken in the works themselves, not added later by scholars. The section also ties back to earlier discussions of absurdity and authenticity. The absurd appears when Meursault looks at the sky on the day of his execution and sees nothing but a bright sun. He feels no fear, only a clear view of the present moment. That scene links directly to the idea that the absurd is the clash between expectation and reality. Authenticity shows up when Vladimir decides to keep talking with Estragon, even though they know the conversation may never lead to Godot. Their choice to stay together, despite the emptiness, is an act of being true to each other. Real-world examples show how the ideas keep moving. A student in a university may read The Stranger and write an essay about how the novel helped him accept that his own feelings are valid, even when friends expect a different reaction. A city planner may look at Munch's bridge painting and think about how public spaces can give people a place to pause and choose a direction. In both cases, art becomes a tool for thinking about choice, freedom, and responsibility. Modern films also echo the same themes. The movie, Lost in Translation, follows two strangers in a foreign city who feel out of place. Their quiet conversations about daily life mirror the waiting in Beckett's play. The film does not explain a philosophy, but the feeling of being alone in a crowd is a visual form of the absurd. Another film, Her, shows a man who falls in love with an artificial intelligence. The story asks whether love is a choice we make or a program we follow. That question ties back to authenticity. Is the character being true to his own desire, or is he following a script created by technology? In visual art, the work of contemporary photographer Gregory Crewdson shows empty suburban houses at night, lit by strange light. The scenes look ordinary but feel eerie, as if the viewer is looking at a place where something important is missing. The emptiness can be read as the feeling of waiting for a meaning that never arrives, similar to the waiting in Waiting for Godot. The photographer's choice to capture that stillness is an artistic way of asking the viewer to consider what they would do if they were alone in that house. The calm narrator also mentions how existential ideas appear in music. The song The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel speaks of people talking but no one listening. The lyric people hearing without listening can be linked to the idea that society often fills the silence with noise, while the true question of meaning stays unheard. The song's simple melody lets the listener feel the emptiness, much like a painting can show an empty street. The discussion of literature, theatre, and visual existentialism and religion sit at a crossroads where questions of purpose meet questions of belief. In the first part of the series, the narrator explained how meaning can feel both inviting and frightening, and how anxiety often appears when a person looks for a firm ground. This section picks up that thread and asks how the search for meaning changes when faith is added to the mix. The roots of existential thought about religion go back to the early 19th century. One of the first voices was Søren Kierkegaard, a Danish pastor who wrote about the personal jump that faith demands. Kierkegaard believed that truth is not a set of facts that can be proved in a lab. He wrote, "Objectivity is truth, meaning that a person must own belief inside the heart, not just repeat a doctrine." For him, the act of believing was a leap across a gap that reason cannot bridge. This leap, he said, is both terrifying and freeing. Kierkegaardian ideas grew out of a conflict with the established church in Copenhagen. The young pastor tried to become a regular priest, but the church leaders rejected his application because his sermons emphasized personal choice over church authority. The clash forced him to write from the outside, and his famous work, Fear and Trembling, reads like a diary of a man who feels both love for God and dread of the empty rituals that surround him. In that book, he tells the story of Abraham, who was asked to sacrifice his son. Abraham's willingness to obey, even when the command seemed absurd, shows the kind of personal commitment Kierkegaard thought true faith required. Across the same century, a different voice began to speak. Albert Camus, a French writer born in Algeria, never called himself an existentialist, but his ideas sit right beside those of Kierkegaard. Camus saw the world as silent and indifferent. He called this condition the absurd. In his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, he wrote, "The absurd is the conflict between the human longing for clarity and the silent, indifferent universe." For Camus, prayer could feel empty because there is no answer waiting on the other side. He argued that the only honest response to this silence is to keep living, to create meaning through action, even while knowing that the universe offers no guarantee. Camus' stance was not a denial of all belief. He simply refused to let a God-filled story solve the problem of absurdity. In the 1940s, he took part in public debates with priests and philosophers who defended religious hope. One famous debate in Paris pitted Camus against the theologian Gabriel Marcel. Camus said that a belief in a higher plan could hide the real pain of living without a script, while Marcel argued that faith gave people a way to turn anxiety into hope. The debate was recorded in newspapers and sparked a wave of articles that asked whether religion was a comfort blanket or a cage. Both thinkers agree that anxiety is a sign that something deeper is at work. Kierkegaard called this the dizziness of freedom. He said that when a person stands at the edge of a choice, the fear of making a wrong step can push them toward prayer, but also toward doubt. Camus called the same feeling the feeling of the absurd. He believed that the feeling is a clue, not a curse, and that it can be used to build a life that is honest and vivid. To see how these ideas play out today, imagine a teenager named Maya. Maya studies hard, plays video games, and hangs out with friends. She feels a hollow after each test, as if the grades do not tell her why she is here. One day she hears a classmate talk about prayer as a way to calm nerves before a big exam. Maya tries it, but the words feel like a script she does not own. She wonders why prayer feels empty. In a Kierkegaardian view, Maya's emptiness shows that she has not yet taken the personal leap. She is still repeating a habit without making it her own. In a Camusian view, Maya's feeling points to the absurd. The world does not give a clear answer, and the only way forward is to find a purpose that she builds herself, perhaps by helping a younger student or by creating art. Now picture an adult named Luis. Luis goes to a Sunday service each week because his family expects it. He sits in the pew, listens to hymns, and watches the pastor speak about love and forgiveness. Yet after the service he feels a lingering doubt, as if the words are beautiful but do not touch the part of him that worries about death and loss. He asks himself whether the ritual is a mask that hides his anxiety. Kierkegaard would say that Luis is caught in what he called the crowd. He is following the group without confronting his own inner voice. The solution, for Kierkegaard, is a solitary conversation with God that forces Luis to own his belief. Camus would say that Luis's doubt is a sign that the church promise does not answer the silence of the universe. Camus would suggest that Luis could use the feeling to create his own values, perhaps by volunteering at a shelter, thereby giving his life a purpose that does not rely on a divine plan. Both examples show how existential ideas help people see why faith can feel both comforting and hollow. The ideas also lead to two common counter-arguments. The first counter-argument is that faith gives a clear purpose that existential doubt cannot provide. Many believers claim that a belief in God offers a map for life, a set of moral rules, and a promise of an afterlife that eases anxiety. They argue that without that map, people drift and may fall into despair. The second counterargument is that religion solves the problem of absurdity by providing a story that explains why the world exists. In this view, the story of creation, redemption, and eternal life removes the feeling of emptiness that Camus describes. Proponents say that the story fills the silent gap and lets people live without constantly questioning the meaning of each moment. Existentialists respond to the first counter-argument by pointing out that purpose given from outside can feel like a borrowed coat. It may keep a person warm, but it does not fit the shape of the wearer. Kierkegaard warned that the greatest hazard of all, losing one's self, may be avoided only by a leap of faith that is truly personal. He meant that a purpose that is not owned can be lost as easily as a borrowed coat. Camus answered the second counter-argument by reminding that a story, even if beautiful, does not change the silence of the universe. He wrote, "There is no sun without shadow. The story may give light, but the shadow of doubt remains." He suggested that people should accept the shadow and keep moving forward, like Sisyphus rolling his stone up the hill. Real-world applications of these ideas appear in therapy, education, and community work. In existential psychotherapy, a counselor may ask a client why prayer feels empty, not to argue against belief, but to help the client see where the ritual stops being personal. The therapist may guide the client to rewrite the prayer in their own words, turning a repeat into an authentic conversation. In schools, Teachers who know about Kierkegaard's No Leap may encourage students to write personal reflections on what faith means to them, rather than just reciting verses. Community leaders who understand Camus' view of absurdity may design programs that let people create meaning through service, art, or sport, without demanding that participants adopt a specific creed. Modern interpretations keep the conversation alive. Some contemporary philosophers blend Kierkegaard's emphasis on personal faith with Camus' love of the absurd. They argue that one can hold a belief in something greater while still admitting that the universe does not hand out clear answers. This hybrid view suggests that prayer can be both a personal act and a reminder of the mystery that surrounds us. Others, especially in secular circles, use Camus' ideas to argue that moral systems can be built on human empathy alone without invoking a deity. They point to the rise of humanist movements that celebrate shared values while accepting the lack of a divine script. An analogy can help clarify the tension. Imagine a lighthouse on a foggy coast. For a sailor, the light offers a fixed point to steer toward. That is like faith that gives clear purpose. However, the fog never fully lifts. The sailor still feels the cold wind and the unknown depth of the sea. That lingering uncertainty is like the absurd. The sailor must decide whether to trust the light completely or to learn to navigate by the stars, by the feel of the boat, by the rhythm of the waves. Existentialism invites the sailor to keep both tools in mind, to use the light when it helps, but also to stay alert to the fog. Historical anecdotes add color to the picture. When Kierkegaard wrote Either Or, he published it under a fake name, Victor Eremita, to avoid the church's censure. He wanted his ideas to be judged on their own merit, not dismissed because of his position as a pastor. The book presented two ways of living: the aesthetic life of pleasure and the ethical life of responsibility. The hidden authorship showed his fear that the church would swallow his message before it could reach anyone. Another anecdote involves Camus' meeting with the French bishop Henry de Lubac in 1946. The bishop invited Camus to discuss the problem of evil. Camus replied that he could not accept a God who allowed suffering, and the conversation ended with the bishop calling Camus the dangerous man. The exchange was reported in the newspaper Le Figaro and sparked a public debate about whether literature could challenge religious doctrine. Both thinkers left behind a wealth of quotes that still echo today. Kierkegaard wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." This reminds the listener that reflection on faith comes after experience, but action must happen now. Camus offered, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." Though not about religion directly, the line speaks to the idea that inner strength can be found even when belief feels cold. These words help viewers see that existential thought does not demand a rejection of religion, but a deeper look at why belief matters to each person. When the narrator earlier spoke about anxiety, the link to religion becomes clear. Anxiety often spikes when a person feels that their life lacks a solid base. Religion can act as a base, but if the base is built on borrowed stones, the anxiety may return. Existentialism asks the person to examine whether the base is truly theirs. It does not promise to erase anxiety, but to give it a name and a place. In practical terms, a person who feels that prayer is empty might try a simple exercise. First, write down a prayer that uses one's own words, describing the fear, the hope, the question. Second, read the words aloud and notice which parts feel true and which feel forced. Third, decide whether to keep the forced parts, change them, or let them go. This process mirrors Kierkegaard's call to own belief and Camus' call to face the absurd without hiding behind empty phrases. Another practical step for someone who feels unsure after a service is to attend a small group discussion instead of the large hall. In a small group, Each person can speak about what the sermon meant to them and listen to others. The dialogue can reveal whether the faith shared feels personal or merely a tradition. The experience can also show how community can help turn a vague feeling into a shared journey, something both Kierkegaard and Camus valued in different ways. The conversation about existentialism and religion continues in today's media. Podcasts interview people who have left the church and later returned, describing how they walked the line between doubt and belief. Television dramas show characters who pray in moments of crisis, only to feel the prayer bounce back empty. These stories echo the core ideas discussed: the tension between a desire for certainty and the reality of uncertainty. In summary, existential thought offers two lenses on faith. Kierkegaard's Christian existentialism sees faith as a personal leap that must be owned, not inherited. Camus' atheistic stance sees the world as silent and urges people to create meaning despite that silence. Both recognize that anxiety can rise when belief feels hollow, and both propose ways to move forward. The teenager searching for meaning beyond school, the modern world, still hears the voice of existentialism, even as new ideas push it in fresh directions. In the last few decades, scholars have taken the core claim that each person must create meaning and have asked how that claim fits with today's technology, with global inequality, and with the rise of identity politics. One recent thinker, Jean-Claude Milovanoff, tries to tie the old idea of personal freedom to the way digital lives are built. He says that the internet gives a person a stage to choose roles, but also a pressure to fit a script that is written by others. Milovanoff writes, "Rule the screen shows a world of choices, yet the clicks are often guided by unseen hands." In plain terms, he means that even when a person feels free to click any link, the design of the platform can steer the choice without the user noticing. Milovanoff's work sits beside a wave of feminist and anti-racist critiques that say the original existentialists did not see how gender and race shaped the space of choice. Simone de Beauvoir, a classic voice, already warned that women are forced into an other status, but newer scholars argue that the problem is deeper. They point out that a black student in a mostly white university does not have the same set of options as a white peer, even if both are told that you are free to choose. In a recent article, Dr. Aisha Karim writes, "Freedom that ignores the walls built by racism is a promise that cannot be kept." The critique says that the old idea of a pure individual making a free choice leaves out the fact that many people start the race with heavy baggage. The section on ethics earlier in the series talked about how existentialism asks each person to act responsibly for themselves and others. The current discussion adds that responsibility now includes recognizing the ways that society limits options. When a tech worker looks at a glowing dashboard of success, the feeling of emptiness can be traced to the gap between external achievement and internal purpose. The worker, let us call him Alex, has a high salary, a fancy office, and a LinkedIn profile full of accolades. Yet at night, Alex wonders if the code he writes really matters. He feels that the numbers on the screen are not enough to fill the silence inside. This feeling matches the existential claim that success does not automatically give meaning. A second everyday example comes from a student activist named Maya. Maya studies political science and spends her weekends organizing climate protests. She has a scholarship, a clear career path, and supportive professors. Still, Maya asks herself whether a degree will ever let her change the world. She worries that the degree might become a badge that makes her look good without changing the system she fights against. Maya's doubt shows the clash between the promise of personal agency and the weight of institutional expectations. Both Alex and Maya illustrate how modern life can produce a sense of meaninglessness even when the external signs of success are strong. The modern take on existentialism also includes a hopeful side. One counterargument says that the philosophy still offers a useful tool for personal growth. It argues that by accepting the lack of a pre-written purpose, a person can write their own story with intention. This view points to the rise of existential therapy in the 1960s as proof that the ideas can be turned into practical help. In that era, psychologists like Rollo May began to use existential ideas in counseling sessions. They asked patients to face the givens of life, death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness, and to choose how to respond. The therapy helped many people see that even a small choice can feel like a step toward a larger purpose. The success of that movement shows that existentialism can move from abstract thought to everyday coping. A second counterargument pushes back against the claim that existentialism is too focused on the individual. Critics say that the philosophy's stress on personal choice can ignore the larger systems that shape lives. They argue that talking about authentic self-creation can make people feel guilty if they cannot change their circumstances. This line of thought points to the university debate of the 1990s, when a major public university considered adding Sartre, Camus, and de Beauvoir to the core curriculum. Some faculty members argued that the texts were essential for understanding modern thought. Others, especially from sociology and critical race studies, warned that the books often ignore class and race. The debate ended with a compromise. The existential work stayed, but new courses on feminist and post-colonial philosophy were added. The episode shows how the focus on the individual can clash with the need to address collective issues. The modern literature section earlier in the series highlighted how writers use existential themes to explore human freedom. Today, authors like Haruki Murakami and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie weave existential questions into stories about everyday people. Their novels show that the search for meaning is not only a philosophical puzzle, but also a lived experience. In Murakami's Kafka on the Shore, a teenage boy runs away to find his own path, while in Adichie's Americana, a Nigerian woman moves to the United States and asks what it means to belong. Both books echo the idea that each person must decide what matters, even when the world offers no clear answer. Milovanov adds a new twist by looking at how algorithms shape the choice part of existentialism. He notes that recommendation engines on streaming services push users toward certain movies, music, or news. The user may think they are picking freely, but the algorithm has already filtered the options. Milovanov writes, "When the menu is already set, the act of choosing feels like an illusion." This observation links back to the earlier ethics discussion, reminding viewers that true freedom may require awareness of hidden influences. Feminist scholars also bring new language to the conversation. They argue that the self is not a single, isolated thing, but a network of relationships. In this view, the act of creating meaning involves listening to the stories of others, especially those who have been silenced. The critique says that existentialism's classic slogan, "Existence precedes essence," meaning that a person first exists and then defines themselves, can be expanded to include the ways that community shapes that definition. By adding this relational layer, the philosophy can become more inclusive. The modern era also sees existential ideas used in tech design. Some startup founders claim that their products help users find purpose. A meditation app might advertise that it helps you discover your true self. Yet critics point out that the same app collects data to sell ads, turning the search for meaning into a market. This tension mirrors the earlier anecdote about existential therapy. The same ideas that can help people can also be packaged for profit. The section on literature also mentioned how existential themes appear in movies. Recent films like Her and The Social Dilemma show characters wrestling with the emptiness that can follow technological immersion. In Her, a man falls in love with an operating system, highlighting the longing for connection in a digital age. In Social Dilemma, former tech insiders warn that platforms are designed to keep users hooked, making it harder to feel authentic. Both films echo the modern critique that the promise of freedom can be hollow when the environment pushes people in one direction. To bring the ideas home, consider a third everyday scene. A nurse named Luis works long shifts in a busy hospital. He saves lives, but after each shift he feels a quiet ache, wondering if his work will ever change the larger problem of health inequality. Luis's feeling is not a lack of skill, but a sense that the system limits the impact of his personal effort. This example shows how the individual can feel both powerful and powerless at the same time. A fourth example looks at a retiree named Eleanor who volunteers at a community garden. She finds joy in planting seeds and watching them grow. For Eleanor, the act of nurturing life gives her a sense of purpose that does not depend on a career or a degree. Her story shows that meaning can be found in simple, everyday actions, a point that many modern existential thinkers stress. The modern critique also notes that existentialism can be too vague for policy work. When governments design programs to reduce poverty, they often need clear guidelines. A philosophy that says, make your own meaning, does not tell a city how to build affordable housing. Critics argue that this lack of concrete direction limits the usefulness of existential ideas in the public sphere. The counter to this claim is that existentialism can still inspire leaders to think about the human side of policies, to ask whether a law respects the dignity of each person. In response, supporters of existentialism point to the way the philosophy has inspired artistic movements that shape culture. The existentialist play No Exit by Sartre introduced the phrase, "hell is other people," which sparked discussions about how social interactions affect personal freedom. Modern playwrights continue to use this theme to question how social media creates new forms of otherness. By influencing art, existentialism indirectly influences how societies think about themselves. The modern discussion also revisits the idea of authenticity, a word often used in existential thought. Authenticity means living in a way that matches one's true values, not just following what others expect. Today, authenticity is a buzzword on social media, where people post real moments to show they are not just performers. Critics say that turning authenticity into a brand can make it shallow. They argue that the pressure to appear authentic can become another form of conformity. This paradox shows how the original idea can be twisted by market forces. Milovanov suggests a way forward. He proposes that people treat technology as a tool, not a master. He writes, "When the user knows the code stops being a ruler." In simple terms, this means learning how algorithms work can give people back some control. This suggestion ties back to the earlier ethics section, where the responsibility to understand the impact of one's actions is highlighted. The feminist critique also offers a path. It calls for expanding the notion of freedom to include collective liberation. The idea is that personal meaning grows when communities work together to remove barriers. In a quote from bell hooks, that the practice of love is a political act. This line reminds viewers that caring for others can be a way to create meaning, not just an individual quest. The modern era has also seen existential ideas used in education. After the 1990s debate about curricula, many universities now offer courses that pair existential texts with contemporary works on race, gender, and the environment. Students are asked to read Sartre alongside Audre Lorde, for example. This pairing helps them see how the old ideas can be tested against new realities. The cross-reference to the literature section shows how reading stories can illuminate philosophical arguments. Another modern development is the rise of existential entrepreneurship. Some founders claim that building a startup is a way to give shape to one's values. They say that creating a product that solves a problem is a way to make meaning. Critics point out that many startups focus on profit rather than purpose, turning the existential quest into a marketing slogan. The debate continues, showing that the tension between personal meaning and market forces is still alive. In the field of mental health, existential therapy has evolved. Therapists now combine classic existential questions with mindfulness practices. They ask clients to confront the givens of life, then guide them to notice breath and body sensations. This blend helps people stay present while exploring deeper questions. The success of this approach shows that existential ideas can adapt to new scientific findings. The modern critique also includes a point about language. Some scholars argue that the term existentialism itself is a label created by outsiders, mainly French critics, and that the thinkers it groups together did not share a single set of ideas. This historical note reminds viewers that categories can be useful but also limiting. It ties back to the earlier ethics discussion, where labeling can affect how ideas are applied. A final anecdote looks at a community theatre in every morning can start with a quiet pause. In that pause, one can ask a simple question. What choice will shape today? The question does not need to be grand. It can be as small as the decision to take a different street on the way to work. By naming the choice, the mind becomes aware of its own power. That awareness is the first step toward living an existential life. The habit of reflecting on choices each morning builds a habit of responsibility. When the mind sees that each step is a choice, it also sees that each step carries weight. The weight is not a burden, but a sign that one is free to act. Freedom, in this sense, is not a distant ideal. It is a daily fact that can be felt in the act of turning a key, stepping onto a bus, or opening a notebook. To make this habit practical, one can keep a small notebook by the bedside. The notebook can have 3 short lines. What I will choose, what I feel, and what I feel, and what I will learn. Each morning, the writer can fill the lines in a few words. The act of writing makes the thought concrete. It also creates a record that can be looked back on later. Looking back shows patterns, shows growth, and shows the moments when the writer chose authenticity over habit. Authenticity means acting in line with one's own values, not merely following the crowd. It is a core idea in existential thought. When a person chooses a route that feels new, they are testing the habit of following the same path. The new route may be longer, may have more traffic, may show a different park. That small change can spark curiosity. It can turn a commute into a small adventure. The adventure reminds the mind that each moment is open to change. Another simple habit is to pick a hobby that feels risky. By risky, the meaning is not danger, but the feeling of stepping outside a comfort zone. For example, a person who has never tried painting can sign up for a weekly class. The first brushstroke may feel awkward. The mind may think, I am not an artist. Yet the act of trying creates a space where the person can say, I am trying. The act of trying is itself an expression of freedom. It also brings responsibility, because the person must set time aside, pay for supplies, and show up. The responsibility is not a punishment. It is a sign that the choice matters. When the mind embraces uncertainty, it can see it as a chance to grow. Uncertainty is often called anxiety in existential writing. Anxiety is not a sign of weakness. It is a signal that a choice is real. One famous thinker wrote, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." This line reminds that the feeling of unease appears when the mind sees many possible paths. The mind can choose to hide from anxiety, or it can use anxiety as a guide toward a more authentic life. A practical step to use anxiety is to name it. When a feeling of dread appears, the writer can pause and say, I feel anxiety about this choice. Naming the feeling reduces its power. After naming, the writer can ask, "What does this anxiety tell me?" The answer may be, "I care about this outcome," or "I fear losing control." Knowing the source helps the writer decide what to do next. The process of naming and questioning can be done in a few breaths, making it easy to fit into a busy day. One might wonder if all this self-questioning is worth the effort. Some people argue that routine brings stability. They say that a steady job, a regular schedule, and familiar habits keep life calm. In that view, too many questions can shake the calm. The argument has merit. A steady routine can protect a person from stress, from the fear of the unknown, and from the exhaustion that comes from constant self-examination. It can also create a sense of safety for families and communities. Another criticism is that constant self-questioning can be exhausting. The mind can tire from always checking motives, from always wondering if a choice is authentic. The criticism points out that a person may feel drained, may lose energy for work, or may become indecisive. The feeling of being stuck in analysis is real for many. The critique warns that existential practice, if taken to an extreme, can lead to paralysis. These counterpoints do not dismiss the value of existential habits. Instead, they invite balance. One can keep a core routine that provides stability, such as a regular sleep schedule, while still opening small windows for choice. The windows can be as brief as a 5-minute pause before lunch. In that pause, the mind can ask, "What will I eat, and why?" The question does not have to overturn the whole day. It simply adds a moment of reflection that keeps the mind alive. A modern mindfulness retreat offers a real example of balance. In 2022, a weekend retreat in the mountains combined meditation with existential discussion. Participants spent the morning in silent sitting, then gathered around a fire to talk about freedom and responsibility. One guide quoted a classic line, "Man is condemned to be free," and explained it in plain language. Each person must make choices, even when they do not like the options. The guide then asked the group to write down one small decision they would make that week that felt true to them. The participants left with a notebook and a promise to try a new habit. The retreat showed that existential ideas can sit comfortably beside calm breathing, and that both can help people live more fully. A community project also illustrates existential ethics in action. In a small town in the Pacific Northwest, a group of volunteers started a shared stories garden. The garden was built on a vacant lot that had been a source of neglect. The volunteers invited anyone who wanted to plant a seed to share a short story about why they chose that plant. The stories ranged from "I plant rosemary because it reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen" to "I plant a wildflower because I want to see something that grows without control." The project founder quoted a line from an early existential writer, "To be is to act." The quote was displayed on a wooden sign at the garden's entrance. The garden grew, and the community learned that each small act of planting was a choice that mattered. The garden became a place where responsibility was shared, where freedom was expressed in the act of planting, and where authenticity was seen in the personal stories. These two anecdotes show that existential ideas can be lived in many settings. A quiet retreat can turn meditation into a space for choice. A garden can turn a simple seed into a statement of responsibility. Both examples show that the abstract ideas of freedom, responsibility, and authenticity can become concrete actions. To bring these ideas into daily life, one can follow a simple 3-step plan. First, set a daily cue. A cue can be a phone alarm, a coffee brew, or the moment of stepping out the front door. When the cue sounds, pause for a breath and ask, "What will I choose now?" Second, act on the choice with intention. If the choice is to take a new route, walk it mindfully. Notice the trees. Notice the sounds. If the choice is to try a risky hobby, schedule the first session, gather the needed tools, and tell a friend about the plan. Third, reflect briefly at the end of the day. In a few sentences, note what was chosen, how it felt, and what was learned. The reflection can be spoken aloud or written. Over time, the 3 steps become a rhythm that keeps the mind engaged without overwhelming it. The practice also invites the mind to see uncertainty as a gift. When a person faces a decision that feels unclear, the mind can ask, "What does this uncertainty invite me to explore?" The answer may be, "The chance to learn something new," or "chance to test a value." The question turns a vague feeling into a direction. The direction does not have to be perfect. It only needs to be taken. Even simple daily choices can illustrate the core ideas. Choosing to greet a stranger with a smile is a small act of authenticity. The smile can be genuine or forced. When it is genuine, it reflects the chooser's inner feeling. When it is forced, it reveals a gap between inner and outer self. Noticing that gap can prompt a later reflection. Why did I feel the need to hide my true feeling? The reflection can lead to a deeper understanding of one's values. Another everyday example is the decision to turn off the phone during dinner. The choice may feel uncomfortable at first because it goes against the habit of checking messages. Yet the act of turning the phone off creates space for conversation, for listening, for being present. The space is a sign of responsibility toward the people at the table. It also shows freedom, because the person could have kept the phone on but chose otherwise. The act aligns with authenticity when the person truly wants to be present. Quotes from primary sources can guide the mind in these moments. One writer once said, "Where are our choices?" The statement reminds that identity is built by what one does, not by what one thinks alone. Another classic line reads, "Existence precedes essence." In plain words, this means that a person first exists, then creates meaning through actions. The line can be used when the mind feels lost. I exist now, and I will give my life meaning by what I do. When the mind feels pulled toward comfort, it can recall a short passage from a well-known existential author. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. The passage can be read aloud in a quiet moment. The words remind that freedom is not a distant dream, but a daily act. The act can be as small as deciding to read a book that challenges one's view, or as bold as speaking up in a meeting about a concern. It is also helpful to remember a line about responsibility. You are condemned to be free, but you are also condemned to be responsible. The sentence can be broken down for everyday use. Condemned here does not mean punished. It means that there is no escape from having to choose. The mind can accept that responsibility as a sign of being alive. The acceptance can turn anxiety into purpose. Balancing the need for stability with the desire for authenticity is a skill that can be refined. One way to practice balance is to set a full stability anchor. The anchor can be a regular activity that provides comfort, such as a weekly family dinner or a nightly walk. The anchor is not a barrier to choice. It is a base from which new choices can launch. When the mind feels the pull of routine, it can ask, why is this anchor supporting my growth, or is it holding me back? The question can be answered with a simple yes or no, and the answer can guide whether to keep the routine or to adjust it. The practice of reflecting on choices each morning also helps to avoid the trap of endless self-questioning. By limiting the reflection to a short, focused question, the mind prevents the spiral of doubt. The mind can set a timer for 2 minutes, answer the question, and then move on. The timer creates a boundary that protects energy. The boundary respects the criticism that constant self-questioning can be draining, while still keeping the spirit of existential practice alive. In addition to personal habits, the mind can bring existential ideas into relationships. When a friend asks for advice, one can respond with, "What choice feels true to you?" The response does not give a direct answer, but it invites the friend to own the decision. The invitation respects the friend's freedom and responsibility. It also models authenticity, because the person speaking stays true to the belief that each person must choose for themselves. The mind can also apply existential ideas to work. At the start of a workday, one can ask, "What will I do today that aligns with my values?" The answer may be to help a colleague, to finish a project with care, or to speak up about an unfair practice. The answer can be written on a sticky note and placed on a monitor. The note serves as a reminder that work is not just a series of tasks, but a field for exercising freedom and responsibility. When the mind encounters a setback, such as a missed deadline or a disagreement, the existential lens can turn the event into a learning moment. One can ask, "What does this setback reveal about my choices?" The answer may be that a deadline was missed because too many other commitments were taken on. The realization can lead to a new choice, to set clearer limits. The process shows that even negative events carry the possibility